In developing strategies for unraveling complexities in passage work, Dorothy Taubman recognized that grouping is an aspect of technique that organizes the playing for greater fluency. Grouping is accomplished either through physical breaks that group particular notes together, or through mental organization that simplifies complex designs. Grouping often not only makes passages more manageable, but enhances the music as well. It also promotes security and speed. There are musical breaths and physical breaths. These, of course, are called phrases. So now back to Beethoven. We have 8 reasons to group. The first reason that I chose is bidirection. Grouping by direction facilitates a change in direction, and there's no loss in speed. It just seems like the music will flow more easily. So the first example I have, which was in...
I've lost my sound.
I'm going to continue. The first example that I have is grouping by direction. Opus 10, number 3. The score in almost every edition has one long slur, phrase mark, over the notes. Here are the notes. And if somebody plays that, there might be a fear factor. So Taubman said, if we group according to direction, in this case, we're not going to disturb the single rotations of the left, right, left, right, left, right, from the elbow to the fingertip, supporting the finger action of all the fingers together. But she would think from the F sharp, and then she would think the next group from the D, and then from the B. So actually it forms a chord, but I will highlight it. First group, second group, third group. Together, first, then from D the higher note, from B the higher note, putting it together. So that way it's all absorbed. It's very subtle. Nobody listening would think that the player might have a concept of grouping here, but somehow it's been divided into smaller groups for the mind. There's no physical change at all. There's no let go. There's no association with I must physically get off the keys and start again. The next example that I have for the same direction grouping is in the Tempest Sonata opening, Opus 31, number 2, measures 2 to 5. This one's very simple to follow, and you might say to yourself, oh, sure, I do that all the time. So the motif is, and repeats, and then goes up to D. So Taubman would say, don't show any seams. It's seamless, but and there we go. Very simple, but it's actually been divided, so to speak, as though you were going to divide a word into syllables. The second concept is to avoid a stretch. So many times there's a passage where there's a distance that physically cannot be connected. So in the case of avoiding a stretch, like I said, sometimes we have musical breaths, sometimes we have physical breaths. So in the case of avoiding the stretch, it's going to be a physical breath. The example that we have here is from the Waldstein. And no matter how many wonderful, fantastic, talented pianists play this piece, everybody growls at this couple measures because it just seems like it's awkward. So in measures 114 to 115, Taubman suggested that you group with trying to make complete legato as written in the score in a physical way, I'm going to have a big elbow gesture because I'm going to have a huge, what we would call abduction or stretch is the common word, from 5 to 2. There's no other fingering choice. The fingers can't do it alone. So you're going to see, I'll do it slowly, that my elbow had to kind of kick in. And the whole torso feels odd. So even if I were to try to somehow blend that in, it's awkward. So instead, it's so subtle. Now my second finger will replace my thumb. So it doesn't even have to find a new location. The thumb was sitting on the key that the second finger will take over. So that one is called avoiding stretching. And that, like I say, is a breath that's a physical breath. The next type of grouping, number 3, is from a quick note to a long note. Because sometimes if I disconnect a phrase, again, I have a feeling of uncomfort, or it's hectic, or maybe I'm going to mess up. So in the Waldstein, you have it as example measure 272 to 273, first movement. The left hand has a grace note, and then it has 16ths. The music actually has fingering by most of the leading publishers as thumb and thumb again. So when I go thumb again, and I try and speak, everything is uneven. If I do from there and then 2, 3, 1, 2, I have a scale going down this legato. If I put the hands together slowly, I'm just going to always think from my quick note. There's also a cueing that we call, cueing being that one hand says to the other, follow me. So as soon as my right hand senses that I played the quarter note, it comes in with the fingering 2-1. For anybody who plays this, after I do the thumb on C, I go 2, 3, 1, 2, which puts me right over the next grace note, 1, 2, and I can use that pattern for the entire motif. So that is one that has more legato than you traditionally were told by the publisher. Remember, most of the fingerings are editorial, not from the composers themselves. Now, the next example that we have is according to the beat or against the beat. So you'll find a lot of this is something that you instinctively do. Okay, a lot of this information is just some wisdom of being very down to earth and logical. So the next example that I have in the Beethoven's Opus 10 number 2, last movement, actually some editions have no slur or phrase over these notes. Some editions have a long slur over all of them. Taubman said the best way to bring out the melody line is to go by the beat. So the melody goes, and somehow it has to be put together in a unit. It can't just be those separate little. So it's a little bit direction, but it's also beat. So I'm going to have 2 groups per bar. E, G, F, A flat, G, B flat, A flat, C. And because it's all single rotation, the single rotation you can just feel from the elbow to the fingertip. It's just like she used to say, shake your forearm like you are a cheerleader, okay? Yay, hooray. And this is the fastest movement, because we do have to go up and down and we have to go across. But when we go up and down and across, somehow we have to combine it with the skill of having a sense of the rotation, but yet we're landing straight on the key. So again, like Mattei said, his book, The Invisible and the Visible, we have to think things, but most of the time, nobody's going to see it. If it looks comfortable, that's what it is. If somebody looks uncomfortable, they probably are. So that's a very simple one that most people probably do. The according to the beat or against the beat. The next one, number 5, we have 8 in total, is called grouping by in and out key locations. I always told Mrs. Taubman, because I knew her from 1980, that I felt that her great gift to the pianist was her idea of in and out key locations according to the finger lengths. We're always allowed to have our thumb off the keyboard so that all the long fingers have plenty of room in the white key area. We're not allowed to have the pinky off because that causes a deviation or a twisting motion at the wrist. And that deviation can cause carpal tunnel syndrome. As subtle as it is, if somebody continuously plays with a deviation, twisting out and not having straight with yourself on the keys, instead of straight with the piano, but straight with yourself and the body feeling the out in the in movements, then for me, her in and out was really something I'd never heard about in any conservatory. So what happens is when I'm going to be playing the black thumb, and this is Opus 2 number 3 first movement, the little cadenza measure 233. If I have a black thumb, I'm allowed to come out for the longer fingers. I don't have to be stuck in the black keys because even though they're thinner than the white keys, they're heavier. Just that's the mechanism. So when I'm going to play the Opus 2 number 3, I'm going to actually have 2 different key spots for my second finger, because the one that plays after the first thumb can stay there, but the next one is going to bring me out to play the third finger there. If the third finger played in the black key area, you can even measure the E. It's almost double the width in the white key area than it is in the black key. So this was her creation of in and out. How do I move in and out? I don't move in and out by clenching my fingers like this to get out of there. I move in and out from my elbow. So it's almost like I'm slicing bread. When I said words like that, she'd laugh and she'd say, ah, that's a good way to describe it. But the point is that you do this movement all the time. I go to get the music, I'm doing the in and out, okay? I go to get my pen, in and out, okay? I go to fix my chair, I went out. So this was an invention that to me, it was never discussed about key spots and the length of the fingers and where you belong. So in the right hand, you could use your thumb. You could also use your second finger. It's always preferred on a black note to use a second finger, but I'll still have 2 different key spots for my third finger. And if you have instruction in this, you get it right away. But you can think about it and try it after this morning's class. So I'm playing here in the black key area, and then I went a little further out because I want my 4th and 5th to be in the white key area. And the interesting thing is that because my left hand has no black keys, it's going to be playing out while the right hand is in. Watch this. And it almost feels like you're dancing. And it's kind of like that, a little bit like a juggler. It's very cool feeling. Now, in the left hand, again, I'm going to remind you, and it's a whole different lecture of in and out, but that if I clench too tightly in my long fingers and don't allow the motion to have my hand just feel as though it's got curvature, but not clench, okay? The problem with clench is it ties up the muscles that you have in your forearm. It's called overflexion. And if you try to open your hand, I'm turning this way to show you, to play some kind of a chord, it's resisting because the fingers are too tightly curved. So we want to have, instead of a tight clench, a natural curve. So when I play my left hand, I can start in the white key area. And as I play the second finger on F the second time, it just brought me subtly in. Once you learn in and out, then you can just feel as though you've done it and it's so subtle and you know what it's about. It's something that's just very natural as soon as your body interacts with it, because there's so many times when I move at the piano and I am doing this motion. So I grouped it like black and white. And then the trill, obviously, single rotation, and it's in white key area. So that's another case where I am using musical breath and I have no physical breath. I did not get off the keyboard. So that takes care of what we call the in and out location. The next location that we have is for long running passages. One of the most famous ones that students often would say, if you said, well, in a Beethoven sonata, what's a long running passage that you think about and maybe it's not that easy? And the long running passage is the last movement of the Moonlight Sonata. So this again is one where you are mentally going to organize the notes. That's all you're going to do, so that it doesn't seem so long-winded. There's a rhythmic pulse and there's mental organization. So take a look at it. We're in C-sharp minor, and it's kind of a sharing that the right hand does with the left with the G-sharp, the fifth step of the chord. So I've got the second inversion. So I'm cueing, so to speak. Right hand played the G-sharp and then the left took over. That's my group. And I finished there. I'm not going to group individually, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, because when I want to play in speed, it's going to seem frustrating that there are too many little breaks. So here I have the first group from G sharp. Second group from G sharp. Third group from G sharp. Same in the next, from G sharp, and then from G sharp again. So in speed, nobody knows. Of course, there are other elements that are going on here. Tomorrow, Dr. Witten's going to be talking about shaping. So of course, there's shaping over here. It can't be done just isolated fingers like this, and it can't be done without the sense of the unit of the forearm with the flow. That becomes a very easy passage. Now, the next, number 7, next to the last, dense combination of notes from, or going from more to less. So the example that we have that I like from this is the Pastoral, I'm sorry, not Pastoral, Opus 26, the 4th movement, and measure 26 and 27. So we have in the right hand, the chord going to the single note. And then the interval going to the single note. One of the incredible things that I found about working with Mrs. Taubman was it almost seemed like you start looking into the piece. How did the composer write? What were the figurations? And it becomes easier technically and musically. When I look at the right hand over here, yes, it's a chord and a single note, but the skeleton of it is this broken octave. And the same thing here. So if I'm teaching a student, even if I'm teaching Opus 49, all of a sudden, that's quite easy. And the C, A flat, is going to happen, and the C, E, D, da, 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 da. the melody is going to be easy to play because the rest of the hand just kind of put the key down, and it becomes really easy to think in one direction, going up, going up, going up, and from the thicker interval, and then chord or interval to the single note. The opposite sometimes happens the way music is written, and that would be going from fewer notes to more notes. So if we look at Opus 22, in the first movement, we have the extreme opposite. The melody is supported by, we're actually in the first inversion, but, and the melody moves, but the accompaniment just stays. So I'm going to always be leaning a little bit more with the emphasis of the rotation toward the audience. And I feel empowered, just like my arm is supporting. And if you notice, all my fingers go down at the same time. And here, they're arrows. If you actually download it, you'll see the arrows mean that in and out that I talked about. So I have to start going a little bit toward black keys. If I don't, I might feel awkward in a twisting motion. So I'll do it incorrectly if I can. So I didn't prepare myself, and we never want to have in the middle of the piano the pinky closer to you and the thumb further in, because the normal position would be the pinky closer to the fall board in this location. Where it's going to change when I get further up, it's going to reverse itself. So don't forget, when you do the single note, you go in. So it feels excellent. It just feels like I could practice that so many times, and I'm not going to have a feeling of discomfort at all. And the very last one I kind of made up, because a lot of times in doing lectures or working with students who want to memorize something very quickly, I found that there is also this visual, which you might call color coding the keys. So the visual of the white and black is very interesting. If you take a look, this is the last example. When you do the Pastoral Sonata, so when you take a look at the measures of the first movement, the Pastoral, measures 109 to 121. What happens here is that actually the left copies the right. It's an octave melody line. So the right hand starts on the black key and the left on the white. They reverse. So right did white in the left, right hand had black. Reversed. And when they play white, it's very interesting because you're in a piece that's in D major and B minor. So that's the only white. I'll do it again. Continues the same way, but now this time the white keys will be in the right and the black in the left. And they're opposites. So you can see that there's a sense of knowing key location also that gives confidence. So grouping is really very finite in its own way, and it can be applied, doesn't matter what technique you studied, where you're from, where you got your education. It's something that I feel, that's why I chose talking about it today. It's something you can go home and think about and see how it might help in your teaching, how it might help in some piece that you're playing, because it really, to me, is an add-on that you can discover without changing your interpretation. And it might even help your interpretation.